Hey Alan, I just wanted to go ahead and give you some feedback on your literature review. So I'm going to try something new today. I'm going to read through your paper and sort of just make comments as I'm reading through it. And hopefully that will be useful for both of us. Hopefully it'll save me a little time and hopefully it'll be useful for you. So here we go. My research question is, how does a psychologist identify whether a depressed patient's mind is stable enough to stop attending sessions? And while I found a lot of interesting information, okay, I'm just gonna, I'm gonna make some comments as I'm reading through. So sometimes when we are writing a first draft, we're just writing our ideas out, stuff that however those ideas come out on paper is fine, but when we are thinking about revising for our final draft, we're thinking about our audience. One thing we need to think about is considering the word choices that we're using and the overall tone and language that we're using. And this sounds a little bit conversation. Well, I found a lot of interesting information, maybe more than what I expected. That just feels like something that you would say conversationally, or it feels like something that you would say like in a reflection that you were writing for yourself. But when you're writing for an academic purpose, then it probably needs to be a little less conversational, a little less self-reflective, and just get straight to the point. So my research question is blah blah blah. Okay, and then you can say there, we can probably just cut out some of that reflective stuff here and just get straight to the point, right? You can say, instead you could say something about how like there are a lot of different perspectives on this question. Instead of bringing yourself into it, you can just state the fact, like you found a lot of interesting information. We can just state there are many, there are various perspectives on this question, or something like that. First of all, there are many types of depression a human can experience, and each type of depression has its own type of session treatment. So that's interesting. I also learned, so that's another kind of like conversational phrase we could probably do without for an academic paper, that a psychologist is not going to make your depression go away on their own. Family support is also very important. Okay. So when you use a word like you or your, sometimes it's appropriate if for some readings that you want to speak directly to your audience, but other times your audience is like, well, me, my depression? Are you talking about me? And it might not always be effective. So you need to decide as you're writing, if you want to, do you really want to directly address your audience here or not? So I don't want to tell you never to do it, but in, again, academic writing, it's not that common. Sometimes people will say we instead, right? Like to say, like, I want to be including you, because the we is like the first person plural. It's including you as the reader. So sometimes academics will use we instead, like we and our and us. When you want to feel inclusive and include the audience, but you don't want to be like, hey, you, sometimes you can use we instead. Okay, a psychologist is not going to make your depression go away on their own. Family support is also very important. Previous studies have shown that close support of marital and family relationships can moderate the depressive effects of life stress, and conversely, that a lack of support may potentiate the effects of environmental stress. Okay, that sounds like a good quote. We just need to make sure that you have a citation here. Where did you get it from? No italics are needed. Just the quotation marks are enough. You might also think about, in class we practiced some of those signal phrases for integrating quotations. So I don't know where. Oh, so see here, you've got the next sentence. That is according to practice patterns for the outpatient treatment of depression in a case-managed delivery system utilization study. Okay, so I can see that you're trying to cite it here. Usually this kind of thing would come first before the quote. Oops. I have to push post here, or it won't show up the right way. Usually this kind of thing would happen before the post, maybe. Before the quotation. And then you also want to consider whether or not it's really important to you to state the whole title, especially when the title is so long. So if you decide that it's important for your audience to know this title because you think that, hey, they'll think that this is perfect, then you should use it. If you're like, oh, it doesn't matter that much whether or not they know the exact title, then don't use it. You can just say, in a recent study published in, and then the journal, or in a recent study, or scientists have found, or something else. So you can use other signal phrases too. One of the articles I chose to use for my research. So you don't even have to say that. If you're commenting on the article, we know that you chose it for your research, so you don't even have to say that. Finding a patient that is actually okay without them saying they are is very difficult according to my findings. There is usually small details they look for. Who? So I have to read the whole sentence. They look for when the patients ask questions, like, for example, I think that you mean like the psychiatrists or the psychologists. I'm not sure. When you're using, just a rule of thumb for any kind of writing, when you're using a pronoun like that, you need to make sure, pronouns are like they point at whatever was right in front of them. So it's hard to say who's the they that you're talking about, and the most specific patient that the most specific noun that's before that is patient, and that doesn't really make sense. So you probably need to just say, go ahead and state who it is that you're talking about. There's usually small details they look for when patient is asked questions, like, for example, how is life going now? Is it better? Do you feel better? What do you think about yourself now? So I want to know, where did you get these questions from? You need to give me a citation. You didn't make them up yourself, right? You got them from somewhere, so go ahead and cite them. Now these questions are just questions that came into my head. Oh, but they're similar to ones that normally a psychologist would ask a patient to see what their response would be, and if any eye contact is being made. Okay, so again here, I don't know if I would use the questions at the top of your head. I would probably find a source. Since you're not a psychologist yet, we don't want to suggest that these are the questions that they're asking. We need to find a source that can say these are the questions that we're asking. In my personal experience, I've been to therapy, but it wasn't for depression, but for anger issues I used to have when I was a preteen. I can kind of relate to the topic, because this is sort of, again, a little bit conversational, because I wasn't there for so long, probably 3 months tops. So again, this is kind of conversational. So again, I don't know who your audience is. If your audience is like maybe teens or somebody who's used to an informal way of speaking, I can kind of see being a little bit informal, but this is probably too informal because remember, we're still doing an academic research paper, so try to maybe go back through and keep the ideas there, but revise for maybe more academic language. I started feeling better about myself and actually was able to control the anger I would build up most of the times. And somehow the psychologist was able to see that by my actions and eye contact I gave him. And I know this because I had asked him why he was so sure I was ready to be out again without having psychology treatment, mainly psychological treatment. This experience relates to my topic because a psychologist is well taught perhaps on the kind of small gestures a patient shows, and if the gestures mean they are recovering or getting worse, like the small gestures I would show. Okay, this is really interesting. It's really interesting that you're sharing this information. I'm gonna say that probably this might fit in better in maybe in the, well, I don't know if you would want to put it in the introduction. But I think that if you keep it in the literature review, you're going to have, that's fine, but it would have to come after a lot more secondary research. So you can't, I mean, it's really good that you're saying that, but the literature review really is based on other people's research. So it's good that you're showing how you're connecting to it, because it's showing that this is really a real, a real question that you have, and it's a valid question, and it lends a sense of urgency to the reader, I think. But we also want to make sure it's based on research, other people's research too, or it's connected off of other people's research. Depression is one of the top main reasons a person seeks for a psychologist, and being the most top reasons, we probably need to have a citation for that. We can't really just we have to have proof for a claim. If we say that that's one of the top reasons, we can't just say, well, I assume that it's a top reason. But we have to really know if that's a top reason. Psychologists always try to find new ways to help this type of illness. A patient mind in depression is like a jigsaw puzzle for a psychologist. They get all the little things the person finds annoying, which those would be considered your corners. What does this mean, your corners? Is that something that you learned from when you were in therapy? I'm not sure, so you need to probably explain this vocabulary choice. If it is like a word that gets used a lot in therapy or in in psychology, that's great. You just need to tell your reader so that we understand what you're talking about. Then they start going your way to bigger issues they have, which that would be your way to the middle, until they find the missing piece in the middle, the biggest concern, have a clear picture of what they're working with. Okay, so all of this here sounds like a metaphor that is an interesting metaphor, but you need to explain it. Better yet, see if you can find a source that explains it. If you can't find a source that explains it, but I mean, you've got to have this based on something, right? Like somebody told it to you, whether it was your therapist or something else. You need to show where you're getting it from. Okay, so so some things that you're doing well. There is a strong sense of exigence. There's a strong sense of purpose here, so that's really good. And I think that your reader is going to be able to connect with you and see that this is a topic that's really personally important to you, and that's really important, Alan. I mean, it shows it, it's going to interest the reader, and that's a good thing. I want you also to remember, though, that this is still an academic paper, so we can't put too much emphasis on ourselves, right? Because our emphasis is going to be on our research. When we are finished with the research paper and we're moving on to the public artifact, then you can make it as personal as you want, depending on what what you choose for your purpose in your art and your audience and everything. But for an academic article, we do need to kind of keep it within the confines of a more formalized way of speaking. The main thing that I really need you to work on for your revision is to fill this with citations and quotations. So I see one quote here, and that's it. And then the rest of it is based on personal experience. And remember that when we're doing primary research, you're going to go out and do these interviews and surveys and stuff. That's good, but for that research to be valid, it needs to be based on somebody else's work, because we don't reinvent the wheel every time, right? We learn from what other people have studied, and then we build our questions from there. So you have a lot of personal experience, and we should be able to integrate that into your paper. We might be able to put it in the introduction, or we might be able to keep it in the literature review, but only if the literature review itself is full of secondary research. So you've got this one source here, and we need to, you're mentioning this source, but you have to talk about it more. I mean, you quote it, but we need to actually, if you're going to quote it, you need to be able to spend time telling your reader why is this important. So give an example, or make some other kind of connection to it. Explain to your reader why this is important. So you need to make sure that every time you do a quotation that you are giving a citation and you're also talking about it a little bit, and that you're connecting it to what other sources have said. So remember that you need to have at least 3 sources. That doesn't mean 3 quotes. That means that you're quoting a couple of different times from each of your sources. So really, your literature review is like 400 words usually, give or take. I mean, I'm not really counting words here. But I just wanted to give you an idea that you should have, most of that big chunk should be based on other people's research, so that later on when we integrate our own experiences and then our own primary research, we can see how it's all part of the same connection, just like that green article was talking to us about, that it was all the same. It's argument, it's conversation, not just what I think, right? So if you, as you are revising, if you have questions, I want you to let me know. You can, if you choose to follow these suggestions, go ahead and make those changes here. If you choose not to follow the suggestions, then you just simply need to click this reply button and explain to me why you decided as the author of your paper that you don't want to make that change. And that is fine with me, but I need to make sure that you're making those decisions thoughtfully and rhetorically and consciously as a writer, and not just because you forgot to do them or something like that. Okay? So, again,